night Wembanyama lost the trophy but changed the NBA, Victor Wembanyama walked off the floor without the championship trophy. But somehow, the entire NBA was still talking about his future more than the Knicks celebration. That is the kind of shock only a generational superstar can create. The San Antonio Spurs had just fallen to the New York Knicks in Game 5 of the 2026 NBA Finals, 94-90. The lights were still burning inside Frostbank Center. The crowd was stunned. The Knicks were preparing for a championship parade, their first since 1973. Jalen Brunson had just ripped the heart out of San Antonio with a 4-5-point masterpiece. And Wembanyama, the 22-year-old face of the Spurs, stood in the middle of it all with 19 points, 14 rebounds, and 5 blocks, knowing that brilliance was not enough. But before the pain of that loss could even settle, another story exploded across the league. A contract, a massive one, a number so big it almost sounded impossible. 5 years, $251 million. And with the right awards, it could climb to more than $300 million. That is the twist. Wembanyama lost the finals, but San Antonio may have just made the loudest statement of the summer. This defeat does not scare them, it convinces them. Because the Spurs did not see a broken superstar, they saw a 7'4" nightmare who had already dragged a young team to the biggest stage in basketball. They saw a defensive player of the year. They saw a player who blocked shots, bent offenses, carried pressure, and still had room to become something even more terrifying. The Knicks won the title. No debate. But the Spurs may have found the pain that creates a dynasty. This was not just a loss. This was Wembanyama's first real scar. The kind Michael Jordan had before the Bulls became unstoppable. The kind LeBron had before he learned how heavy the finals really felt. The kind every all-time great carries before the world finally sees the finished version. So, now the question is simple. Did San Antonio just lose a championship? Or did the rest of the NBA just witness the beginning of something much bigger? Before we break it all down, comment where you are watching from. If you believe Wembanyama will come back stronger, press 1. If you think the Spurs missed their best chance, press 2. And if you are new here, subscribe, because this NBA story is only getting crazier. Brunson turned San Antonio's dream into a nightmare. For most of Game 5, San Antonio looked like a team refusing to die. The Spurs were at home. The building was shaking. Every block from Wembanyama felt like a warning shot. Every defensive stop made the crowd believe that maybe, just maybe, this young team still had one more miracle left. They had already blown leads in this series. They had already felt Madison Square Garden swallow a 2-9-point advantage. But this was different. This was their floor, their fans, their last stand. And for a while, the Spurs controlled the story. Wembanyama was everywhere defensively. Shots that looked open suddenly disappeared. Knicks players drove into the paint and saw that impossible wingspan waiting for them. San Antonio held New York to one of its coldest first halves of the season, and the Spurs built another double-digit lead. It looked like the series was going back to New York. Then Jalen Brunson changed the entire mood of the night. He did not panic. He did not rush. He did not look overwhelmed by the noise, the pressure, or the size of the moment. He started attacking the gaps, hunting switches, drawing fouls, and hitting shots that completely drained the energy from the building. A 10-0 Knicks run tied the game. Suddenly, the Spurs were not playing to win. They were playing not to collapse. That is when everything became dangerous. Brunson kept pressing. The Knicks took the lead. San Antonio's offense got tight. Passes came late. Shots looked forced. The young Spurs started to feel the weight of the finals in real time, and once New York smelled fear, they never gave the game back. Brunson finished with 45 points, the kind of performance that turns a star into a legend in one night. He walked into Wembanyama's building in an elimination game and outplayed everyone when the lights were hottest. For the Knicks, it was history. For the Spurs, it was heartbreak. And for Wembanyama, it was the first time the NBA world looked at him and said, "Greatness is here, but the crown is not ready yet." The collapse that will haunt the Spurs all summer. The painful truth for San Antonio is that they were not destroyed because they lacked talent. They were destroyed because they could not close. That is the part that makes this finals loss so brutal. The Spurs did not look overmatched. They did not look like a lucky team that accidentally reached the championship round. For long stretches, they looked bigger, younger, faster, and more dangerous than the Knicks. They built leads. They controlled tempo. They turned games into exactly the kind of defensive battles that should have favored them. But every time the door was open, they failed to slam it shut. Game 4 at Madison Square Garden was the moment that changed everything. A 2-9-point lead in the NBA Finals should be safe. A 2-9-point lead with Victor Wembanyama protecting the rim should feel almost impossible to erase. But somehow, the Knicks did it. Possession by possession, New York chipped away, the Garden got louder, San Antonio got tighter, and by the fourth quarter, the Spurs were no longer playing with confidence. They were playing with the memory of their own mistake. That kind of collapse does not vanish overnight. It follows a team into the locker room. It follows them onto the plane. It follows them into the next game. And in Game 5, you could feel it. The Spurs led again, but nobody watching felt safe. Not the fans, not the bench, maybe not even the players. That is what inexperience does in the final. It makes every missed free throw feel heavier. Every empty possession feels louder. Every defensive mistake feels like the start of another disaster. Wembanyama had brilliant moments, but even he could not escape it. He dominated defensively, he rebounded, he fought. But late in games, the Spurs needed clean offense, steady decision-making, and veterans who could calm the storm. They did not have enough. That is why this loss hurts so much. San Antonio was close enough to touch the trophy. But close is not the same as ready. And the Knicks proved it. Wembanyama's first scar. Every superstar has one night that follows him forever. For Victor Wembanyama, this was that night. He did not leave the finals as a failure. That would be too easy, too lazy, and completely unfair. He left as a 2-2-year-old superstar who had just learned the most painful truth in basketball. Talent can take you to the edge of history, but it cannot always carry you across the finish line. Wembanyama had moments that reminded everyone why the Spurs are ready to hand him the keys to the franchise. He protected the rim like a one-man wall. He changed shots that never appeared in the box score. He grabbed rebounds in traffic. He made Knicks players think twice before attacking the paint. At times, he looked like the most impossible player on the floor. But the finals do not care about potential. They care about the final 5 minutes. They care about free throws when your legs are tired. They care about decision-making when the defense knows every move you want to make. They care about whether a young team can breathe when the building gets tight and the scoreboard starts moving the wrong way. That is where San Antonio broke. And that is where Wembanyama's real story begins. Because every all-time great has a chapter like this. A chapter where the world stops praising the talent and starts questioning the weakness. Michael Jordan had to get through Detroit before he became untouchable. LeBron James had to carry the weight of painful finals lessons before he became a champion. Kobe Bryant had playoff scars before he became the coldest closer in basketball. Now Wembanyama has his own scar. This loss will not disappear when the season ends. It will follow him into the summer. It will be waiting in every workout, every film session, every late night shooting drill. He will hear the same questions again and again. Can he close? Can the Spurs win with him as the number one option? Does San Antonio need another star beside him? Did this young team arrive too early? And honestly, those questions are not disrespectful. They are the price of becoming the face of the league. When you are ordinary, people excuse your mistakes. When you are special, they study them. Every missed shot becomes a debate. Every quiet fourth quarter becomes a headline. Every lost finals game becomes evidence for someone who wants to doubt you. But that is exactly why this moment could become dangerous for the rest of the NBA. Because Wembanyama did not look like a player who was exposed. He looked like a player who was unfinished. There is a massive difference. Exposed means the league found your limit. Unfinished means the league just saw the early version. And the early version already took San Antonio to the NBA Finals. At 22 years old, he turned the Spurs from a rebuilding project into a championship threat. He made veterans look small. He made elite scorers change their shot selection. He made an entire franchise believe the next decade could belong to them. That does not vanish because of one brutal series. The Knicks took the trophy, but Wembanyama took the lesson. And sometimes, in the career of a generational player, the lesson becomes more dangerous than the victory. Why San Antonio still believes the Spurs could have looked at this finals loss and panicked. They could have focused on the blown leads, the late game mistakes, the missed chances, and the way New York exposed their youth. They could have treated this as proof that the rebuild was not ready, that the roster needed a major reset, that Wembanyama still needed more time before carrying a franchise this deep into June. Instead, San Antonio looked at the same pain and saw confirmation. They saw a player worth building everything around. That is why the reported $251 million extension matters so much. It is not just money, it is a message. The Spurs are telling the league that one finals loss does not change the plan. It actually makes the plan clear, because when a 2-2-year-old can average elite numbers, win Defensive Player of the Year, bend an entire playoff defense, and still have obvious room to grow, the decision becomes simple. You do not hesitate. You do not play games. You put the franchise in his hands and start building the right team around him. Wembanyama is not a normal young star. He is already one of the most terrifying defenders in basketball. He can erase mistakes at the rim, switch onto smaller players, stretch the floor, pass over defenses, and create matchup problems that most teams cannot solve without changing their entire game plan. But the finals also showed what San Antonio must fix. They need more late game control. They need another reliable creator when defenses load up on Wemby. They need veterans who understand how to slow a game down when momentum starts turning. They need players who do not just build leads, but protect them. That is the next phase. The Spurs are no longer trying to prove they belong. They proved that. Now they have to prove they can finish. And that is why this summer is so important. The extension is the foundation. The roster moves are the test. If San Antonio gets the right pieces, this finals loss may not be remembered as the end of a dream. It may be remembered as the beginning of Wembanyama's empire. The $251 million message, the $251 million number is not just a contract. It is San Antonio telling the entire NBA that nothing about this finals loss changed their belief in Victor Wembanyama. Not the blown leads, not the fourth quarter struggles, not the Knicks celebration, not the noise from critics who will spend the summer asking if the Spurs move too fast. The Spurs already know what they have. They have a two-year-old superstar who can protect the rim, stretch the floor, carry a defense, and force every opponent to rewrite its game plan. That kind of player does not come around every draft. Sometimes, not even every generation, the base extension is already massive, but the real shock is the possibility that it climbs near $301 million. That is where the awards matter. All-NBA, MVP, Defensive Player of the Year. These are not fantasy goals for Wembanyama anymore. They are realistic milestones sitting directly in front of him. And that is why this deal feels different. The Spurs are not paying only for what he has done. They are paying for what they believe he is about to become. A player who already reached the finals before his prime. A defender who changes the geometry of the court. A franchise face who can turn San Antonio back into one of the most feared organizations in basketball. For some players, a contract this big becomes pressure. For Wembanyama, it may become fuel. The alien on defense. Wembanyama's defense is the reason San Antonio can dream bigger than almost every young team in the league. Most stars score. Some stars lead. A few stars defend. Wembanyama does all of it, but defensively, he is already in a category that feels almost unfair. When guards drive into the lane, they do not see a normal shot blocker. They see a shadow that keeps stretching. They see arms where open space used to be. They see layups turn into panic passes. They see floaters rushed, dunks abandoned, and entire possessions ruined before the ball even leaves their hands. That is what makes him terrifying. He does not just block shots. He changes decisions. And in the NBA, changing decisions is more powerful than changing numbers. Opponents stop attacking the rim the same way. Coaches adjust their spacing. Stars hesitate for half a second. And in playoff basketball, half a second can destroy an entire possession. This is why the Spurs still believe. Even in a finals loss, Wembanyama proved he can be the defensive foundation of a championship team. He is not some project waiting 3 more years to matter. He matters right now. He already bends games right now, but defense alone does not win the last 5 minutes of the final. That is the next challenge. San Antonio has the wall. Now they need the closer's knife. The Spurs' biggest problem is not talent. The biggest problem for the San Antonio Spurs is not talent. That may sound strange after losing the NBA Finals, but it is the truth. The Spurs were not embarrassed because they were too small for the moment. They were not exposed to some fake contender that accidentally got hot at the right time. For long stretches of the series, San Antonio looked like the team with the brighter future, the more dangerous centerpiece, and the kind of defensive identity that can carry a franchise for years. Their problem was different. Their problem was finishing. That is what the New York Knicks exposed in the most painful way possible. San Antonio knew how to build leads. They knew how to punch first. They knew how to make a crowd believe. They could force bad shots, control the glass, and turn Wembanyama's defense into a nightmare for anyone trying to attack the rim. But when the game slowed down, when every possession became heavier, when the Knicks started cutting into the lead, the Spurs lost their rhythm. That is the difference between being talented and being ready. The Knicks were not always prettier. They were not always faster. They did not always control the first half. But they understood the emotional violence of the finals. They understood that a game is not won when you build a 1-5 point lead. It is won when the other team makes its desperate run and you still stay calm enough to answer. San Antonio did not have that answer often enough. That is why the blown to 9-point lead at Madison Square Garden matters so much. It was not just one bad night. it became a shadow. Once a young team experiences a collapse like that, every new lead feels fragile. Every missed shot feels like the beginning of another disaster. Every Knicks run feels like a memory coming back to life. And in Game 5, you could feel that fear in the building. The Spurs led again. The crowd wanted to believe again. Wembanyama was blocking shots, the defense was active, and for a moment, it looked like San Antonio might force the series back to New York. But the second Jalen Brunson started controlling the fourth quarter, the Spurs tightened up, the ball stopped moving with the same confidence, players rushed decisions, good shots turned into difficult shots turned into empty possessions. That is not a talent issue. That is a closing issue. And closing is one of the hardest skills in championship basketball. San Antonio needs more than Wembanyama's brilliance. They need another creator who can punish defenses when everyone loads up on it. They need veterans who can walk into a timeout during a 10-0 run and make the huddle breathe again. They need players who understand that the finals are not about panic, speed, or emotion. They are about control. Because if every late game possession turns into Wembanyama trying to save everything by himself, the Spurs will keep putting too much pressure on a player who is still growing into his final form. That is the next evolution of this team. They have the superstar. They have the defensive anchor. They have the future face of the league. But now they need the structure around him to match the moment. They need spacing. They need toughness. They need late game discipline. They need one or two players who can look at the scoreboard, hear the crowd losing its mind, and still make the simple play. The scary part for the rest of the NBA is that this flaw is fixable. San Antonio does not need to tear everything down. They do not need to question whether Wembanyama is the guy. They do not need to abandon the plan. They only need to grow up, add the right pieces, and learn how to turn a lead into a win. And if they figure that out, this finals loss may become the last warning the league ever gets. The loss that could create a monster. The rest of the NBA should be very careful about laughing at the San Antonio Spurs right now, because sometimes a finals loss does not destroy a young superstar. Sometimes it creates something much worse for everyone else. Victor Wembanyama has now felt the full weight of June basketball. Not regular season pressure, not first round excitement, not the noise that comes with highlights and viral clips. Real finals pressure. The kind where every possession gets replayed for weeks. The kind where one missed free throw becomes a debate. The kind where one fourth quarter mistake can follow your name all summer. He knows what that feels like now. He knows what it feels like to watch another team celebrate. He knows what it feels like to walk through a silent locker room after coming so close. He knows what it feels like when the world praises your talent but questions whether you were ready to finish the job. That memory will not leave him. And for a player like Wembanyama, that memory can become dangerous. The best players in NBA history are not built only by wins. They are built by the losses that force them to change. Pain exposes what comfort hides. A championship parade can make a team feel complete, but a finals loss shows every crack. It tells you where your body must get stronger, where your mind must get calmer, where your game must become simpler, sharper, and more reliable. That is where Wembanyama is now. He is not starting from the bottom. He is starting from a finals appearance at 22 years old. That is what makes this so terrifying. The unfinished version already carried San Antonio to the edge of a championship. The unfinished version already won elite defensive respect. The unfinished version already forced the league to treat the Spurs like a serious threat. So, what happens when the finished version arrives? What happens when Wembanyama adds more strength and stops getting moved off his spots? What happens when his late game decision making slows down and he starts reading double teams before they arrive? What happens when his teammates learn exactly where to be when the defense collapses on him? What happens when San Antonio adds the right veteran voice and one more reliable scorer? That is the nightmare scenario for the league, because Wembanyama does not need to become a completely different player. He only needs to become a cleaner, calmer, more ruthless version of himself. The Knicks earned their championship. Nothing takes that away from them. Jalen Brunson was incredible. New York was tougher in the biggest moments. They deserved the parade. But San Antonio walked away with something too. A lesson. Oscar. A reason. And sometimes that is how dynasties begin. Not with confetti, not with a perfect ending, not with a trophy lifted on the first try. Sometimes they begin in a quiet locker room with a young superstar staring at the floor, replaying every mistake, and promising himself that he will never feel that helpless again. That is why this loss could be the most important moment of Wembanyama's career so far. The contract will bring pressure. The expectations will get louder. Every opponent will circle the Spurs on the schedule. Every national TV game will become a test. Every fourth quarter will become a question. But that is the life of a franchise player. And Wembanyama is no longer just a prospect, no longer just a highlight machine, no longer just the future. He is the center of San Antonio's entire basketball universe. The Knicks have the ring right now, but the Spurs may have the warning sign nobody should ignore. A two-year-old generational talent just lost the finals, received his first real scar, and is about to be handed a $250 million responsibility. If that pain turns into growth, the NBA may look back at this loss as the night the monster was born. The dynasty question: the confetti belongs to New York. The headlines belong to Jalen Brunson. The championship belongs to the Knicks. But the biggest question heading into the next NBA season belongs to San Antonio. What happens next? That question is why this story is bigger than one finals loss. Championships are often remembered because of who won them. But sometimes history becomes fascinated by the team that lost, not because losing is special, but because the defeat reveals what comes next. And right now, nobody in basketball has a more fascinating future than Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs. Think about where San Antonio was not long ago. The franchise spent years searching for a new identity after the Tim Duncan era ended. There were rebuilding seasons, lottery picks, and countless questions about whether the Spurs could ever return to the top of the league. Then Wembanyama arrived, and everything accelerated. The rebuild stopped feeling like a rebuild. The future became the present. Within just a few years, the Spurs transformed from a team hoping to make noise into a team playing for a championship. That does not happen by accident. It happens because organizations identify extraordinary talent and build around it correctly. The challenge now is making sure this finals loss becomes a stepping stone instead of a scar that never heals. History provides a clear roadmap. Michael Jordan lost before he won. LeBron James lost before he won. Stephen Curry lost before he built a dynasty. Virtually every legendary player faced a moment when the basketball world wondered whether they could take the final step. Those moments felt devastating at the time, but they later became essential chapters in stories of greatness. The lesson is simple. Success rarely comes from avoiding failure. Success comes from learning how to use failure. That is the real opportunity in front of Wembanyama. He now understands exactly what separates contenders from champions. He understands the importance of composure, execution, leadership, and trust. He understands that talent creates opportunities, but discipline finishes them. For the Spurs, the strategy moving forward is equally clear. Continue building around Wembanyama, add experienced players who thrive under pressure, develop the young core, improve late game execution, create an offense that does not rely on impossible heroics. Most importantly, stay patient. The temptation after a painful loss is to overreact. Great organizations resist that temptation. They study the problem, make smart adjustments, and trust the foundation they have already built. San Antonio's foundation is stronger than most teams could ever dream of. They have a generational superstar entering his prime years. They have one of the league's most respected organizations. They have financial flexibility. They have experience gained from the biggest stage in basketball. Most teams spend years trying to reach this position. The Spurs are already here. That is why the $251 million extension is not simply a reward, it is a commitment. It is a statement that San Antonio believes the best chapters of this story have not happened yet. And honestly, they might be right. Because if Wembanyama responds the way all-time greats usually respond, the rest of the league could be facing a completely different challenge very soon. A more experienced Wembanyama, a stronger Wembanyama, a more confident Wembanyama. A Wembanyama who remembers exactly how this finals felt. That version of him could become one of the most dominant forces the NBA has ever seen. The Knicks earned the celebration. The Spurs earned the lesson. Now the basketball world waits to see what they do with it. Will this be remembered as the year San Antonio fell short? Or will it be remembered as the year a future dynasty received its first painful education? Only time will answer that question. But one thing is already clear, Victor Wembanyama's story is just getting started. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video with other NBA fans. Also tell us your prediction in the comments, will Wembanyama win an NBA championship within the next 3 seasons? Press 1 if you believe the Spurs are future champions. Press 2 if you think they still need major changes. And don't forget to tell us where you're watching from. We read every comment, and your opinion might be featured in a future video.